The engine died 20 feet from the gate. Not a sputter, not a warning, just silence. Jack Whitmore's knuckles stayed locked on the steering wheel of his rust-bitten F-150 as the truck coasted through the open chain-link fence and into the graveyard of metal that was Delaney Auto Salvage. The tires crunched over gravel soaked in oil and cold rain, stopping beside a heap of shattered windshields and forgotten lives. Jack exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. The dashboard lights faded to black. No more gas. No more road. His eyes drifted to the passenger seat, a tattered duffel bag, half a pack of crackers, one unopened can of beans, a utility knife, and a crumpled envelope addressed to John Whitmore, last known address. Inside was a rejection letter. Another one. No disability coverage. No job offer. No housing assistance. Just one sentence that burned every time he read it. We regret to inform you. Regret was easy for them. His breath fogged the glass as rain hammered the windshield, like it had a personal grudge. He could see movement through the downpour, a figure walking toward him, slow but steady. Frank Delaney. The man moved like someone who didn't care if he got wet, just wore the rain like a second shirt. Late 60s beard like steel wool flannel clinging to his frame. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. Just nodded once, then banged on the hood with the flat of his palm. Hugh Whitmore Jack opened the door. Boots hitting cold puddles. Yeah. Truck's dead, he muttered. Looks like it gave out in the right place, then Frank said. You bring the $1. Jack reached into his back pocket, pulling out a flattened bill that had survived a wallet long since gone. It was damp, creased, and held with the reverence of someone who knew it might be the last piece of paper he owned that anyone would accept. Frank took it without ceremony. Come on. They walked in silence, passing towers of twisted frames and rows of rusted-out Chevys. The air stank of gasoline, wet tires, and time. Jack pulled his coat tighter. His bones ached not from the cold, but from the weight of too many years and not enough peace. You served right, Frank asked, more statement than question. 4 tours, Jack replied. 2 in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Frank nodded as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. They stopped in front of what looked like a collapsed dinosaur. The RV was long, bloated, and sagging on its axles. White paint flaked off in strips. A large patch of duct tape covered one side window. The door hung slightly ajar. She don't run, tires are done. Roof leaks in heavy storms. But she's dry enough, Frank said. You stay here. Keep the yard safe. I got copper thieves and tweakers crawling in like rats. You see something, shine a light. That's all I ask. Jack eyed the vehicle. Why bother giving me the key at all? Frank cracked a ghost of a smile. Because dignity's not a luxury. You paid. It's yours. He handed Jack a faded key on an orange tag. It was cold in his palm, heavier than it should have been. Jack stood there a moment, staring at the RV like it might vanish if he blinked. Then he climbed the rickety metal steps and turned the lock. The door groaned open. The smell hit first mold, mouse droppings, and something deeply sour. The kind of stink that gets into your clothes and soul. Inside, darkness wrapped around everything. He reached for a light switch out of instinct. Nothing. He pulled a small flashlight from his coat and flicked it on. It was a tomb. Dust floated like ghosts in the beam. The walls were water-stained, the upholstery sagging. A microwave lay face down on the floor, unplugged. The mattress had a stain so dark he didn't want to guess. But there were curtains, a small dinette, a shelf above the window, cabinets, and 4 walls. Jack stepped inside. The floor creaked under his weight. The flashlight landed on a photo still taped above the sink, a smiling family at a lake. 2 kids, a woman, and the RV in better days. The edges were curled. Time didn't ask for permission. He sat down at the dinette bench. It groaned but held. His coat dripped. Rain tapped on the roof like a nervous hand. He pulled the key out again and stared at it. Then at the dollar. "This is all I have left," he whispered, voice thick. $1 a key and whatever's inside that wreck." He set the flashlight down and pressed his fingers to his temples. For a second, the quiet almost seemed peaceful. Almost. Then he heard it, a sound soft, muffled, and not part of the rain. A whimper. Jack froze, tilted his head. There it was again. A faint, high-pitched noise from under the RV. He stood slowly, eyes scanning the dim interior. He stepped outside, rain soaking his shoulders again. Crouched, shining the light under the RV. Eyes. 2 golden eyes blinked back at him. A shadow moved a dog ribs, showing fur matted and soaked. It didn't growl, just stared. Jack lowered the light. The dog didn't run. It didn't trust. But it didn't fear either. They stared at each other, 2 things the world had thrown away. "Of course," Jack muttered. "Of course you'd show up now." He went back inside and grabbed the half can of beans. He stepped down, squatted low, and slid it across the wet gravel. The dog sniffed, stepped forward, and began to eat. Jack backed away and left the RV door open just a crack. By morning, he'd find that dog lying just outside his door. By morning, something would change. The rain hadn't stopped. It had slowed to a rhythmic tapping like fingers drumming on the metal roof, but it lingered cold, insistent, unwelcome. Jack woke to the dim gray light filtering through the RV's fogged windows. His back ached from sleeping on the collapsed dinette bench, and his neck throbbed where he'd twisted wrong in the night. But something was different. Silence. That kind of silence where you knew something or someone was near. Jack sat up slowly. The air was thick with cold and something else. Presence. The RV door was still cracked open just like he'd left it. The wind hadn't blown it wider. That was the first clue. He swung his legs off the bench and stepped carefully to the door, his socked feet almost silent. As he pulled it open, he saw it curled on the top step, soaked fur, clumped together in matted layers lay the dog. The same dog from under the RV. It hadn't run off in the night. It hadn't bolted with the food and disappeared like most strays would. It had stayed. Jack froze, unsure if he should speak, move, or simply observe. The dog looked up, eyes dull but steady, as if it had expected this moment. Rain dripped off its ears. Its body was tense but not aggressive, cautious, tired. Jack crouched slowly. "You again," he said softly. "Didn't expect you'd be waiting for me." The dog didn't growl, didn't flinch. He extended a hand, palm up. The dog didn't move. Jack stood and ducked back inside. He opened the last of his crackers and returned to the door, breaking a few into halves. He placed them gently on the edge of the step and stepped back. After a few moments, the dog sniffed, stood, limped forward, and ate, each movement slow, almost painful. Jack noted the limping front leg, the ribs visible beneath the muddy fur, the torn ear. "You've had it rough, haven't you?" he murmured. The dog looked up, eyes dark and unreadable. Jack leaned against the frame. "Guess we both have." He waited. The dog finished, licked its lips, and looked at the interior of the RV. It hesitated. "I'm not going to carry you in," Jack said. The dog stepped forward. 2 paws inside. Then 4. It didn't explore. It just found the spot beneath the tiny table and collapsed as if its body had finally been given permission to rest. Jack closed the door gently and sat across from him. "You got a name?" he asked. Silence. "Well, neither do I these days," he muttered. "But I guess that don't work for either of us." He stared at the animal, at its worn-down strength, its stubborn presence. "Scout," he said finally. "That work for you?" The dog's ears perked slightly. "Yeah, Scout it is." Jack watched him for a while. The dog Scout breathed, deep eyes fluttering shut. There was no fear, no distrust, just a quiet resignation, a mirrored soul. And somehow it settled something inside Jack that had been untethered for months. That afternoon, he boiled water over a portable camp stove he found buried in a cabinet. He had no coffee, but just the heat. The motion of doing something made the RV feel slightly more like a place where someone lived, not just existed. Scout didn't move much. When he did, it was to shift slightly and sigh like an old man. Jack watched him closely, unsure if he was sick or just weak from the road. He'd need food. Real food. Maybe something from the diner Frank had mentioned once, if it was still open. Around sunset, Jack grabbed his coat. "All right, Scout. I'm heading into town. Don't eat the walls." Scout didn't stir. Charleston was 15 minutes away, 10 if the truck worked, but today Jack walked. The road was slick and empty trees bowing from the weight of the rain. His boots were still soaked from the night before, and they squelched with every step. His legs ached, but something about the walk felt grounding. The town wasn't what it once was. Empty storefronts, peeling signs, a pawn shop with lights flickering like it was giving up on the idea of being noticed. But then there it was, the cafe. Maddie's place. Open. Warm. He stepped inside and was hit with the smell of coffee, fried eggs, and cinnamon. A bell above the door jingled. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Jack stood there like a misplaced coat in a stranger's house. Behind the counter, a woman looked up. Mid-40s hair in a messy bun, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't just stand there leaking rain all over my floor," she called. "Sit down or step outside." Jack blinked, then moved to a corner booth. He removed his coat, letting it drip on the floor. She approached with a menu. "Let me guess," she said. "Haven't eaten in more than a day. Don't want to admit it. Think a black coffee's all you need." Jack met her gaze. "That obvious," she gave a half smile. "You've got the look, I've seen it before. Eggs or pancakes?" "Eggs." She left. He looked around. The place had character. Photos on the wall, handwritten signs, a tip jar full of folded notes and coins. Real. When she returned with the plate, she also slid over a paper bow. "What's this?" he asked. "For the dog," she said. Jack stared. "How did you—" "You're not the only one who's soaked and looks like hell. I saw the paw prints on your coat, and there's something about the way you held the door open." He nodded slowly, voice softer now. "His name's Scout." "Fitting." She poured him coffee without asking. "I'm Maddie," she said. "Jack." They didn't talk much after that. But as Jack ate, he felt something unfurl in his chest, like warmth returning to frozen muscle. By the time he returned to the RV, it was dark. Scout stirred when he opened the door, but didn't get up. Jack tossed the bag of cooked meat near him. Courtesy of Maddie. Scout sniffed, then devoured the contents like he hadn't eaten in a week. Jack leaned against the wall, watching. "Sometimes the only thing that saves you," he said quietly, doesn't even speak your language. Scout licked his muzzle and closed his eyes. Jack sat down, heart oddly full. In the silence that followed, something shifted. The RV didn't feel like a grave anymore. It felt like shelter. And in the morning that feeling would take root thanks to something Scout was about to find buried deep inside the past. The morning light cut through the fog like a blade, soft but certain. Jack stood outside the RV sipping weak instant coffee from a chipped mug he'd found in a cabinet. The world was still damp, the ground slick, and gleaming the sky a blanket of gray. Scout lay stretched just inside the doorway, chin resting on his front paws, watching him with those deep, unreadable eyes. Jack hadn't slept well, not because of the cold or the creaking walls, but because something inside him had started to stir a kind of itch he couldn't name. It wasn't hunger or fear. It was the faint whisper of movement in long-dead gears. He stared across the junkyard. Everything here had once mattered to someone, a pickup that probably hauled lumber, a sedan with a faded family bumper sticker, a motorcycle with a custom flame paint job now dulled to rust. They were all fragments of lives scattered and forgotten. He looked down at Scout. "We're not that different from this place, you know. A little broken. A little lost. Still here, though." Scout wagged his tail once lazily as if to agree. Inside, the air was marginally less sour since Jack had forced open the windows yesterday afternoon. He'd started cleaning a little, just wiping the counters, clearing trash, rearranging what could be salvaged. It wasn't exactly a home, but it was a start. As he pulled the bench seat away from the table to sweep underneath, Scout perked up his ears, twitching. He stood tail low but alert, and walked to the spot Jack was clearing. "What is it?" Jack asked, kneeling beside him. Scout sniffed hard at the floor near the bench leg. Then he pawed it once, twice. Jack leaned in. The floorboard under the bench looked off, just slightly raised. He pressed it with his fingers and felt a faint give, a hidden panel. His heartbeat quickened. He wedged his pocket knife under the edge and pried it up with a groan of old wood and rusted hinges. Underneath was a shallow cavity. Inside lay a wooden box, simple rectangular, no lock, but sealed tight with years of dust and silence. Jack pulled it out and set it on the table. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the lid, and then he stopped breathing. Inside the box were tools. Not just any tools, carving tools. Hand chisels, knives, a mallet, gouges, even a worn leather strop. They were old but cared for, wrapped in oiled cloth. The wooden handles were smooth from use. Some had faint initials carved into them, JWW. Jack sat down hard. These weren't just tools, they were his. Memories slammed into him like a rogue wave. His old workshop, the scent of cedar and pine, late nights hunched over commissions, his son Ethan watching from the doorway wide-eyed, his daughter Sophie playing with wood shavings like they were fairy dust. That was before the foreclosure, before the VA denied his claim, before he lost the house, the business, the family. He reached for a chisel, turning it over in his hand. The handle still fit perfectly in his grip. Scout whined softly, nudging Jack's knee. Jack looked down at him. "You don't bury a gift, Jack, you rebuild with it," he whispered. He didn't know where the words came from. Maybe something his father once said. Maybe a phrase buried in a memory. But it landed heavy in his chest. Jack stood, took a deep breath, and began clearing the table. He grabbed a scrap piece of wood from beneath the sink, some warped cabinet paneling, and set it down. He rolled up the sleeves of his flannel. The light outside was pale but steady. Scout sat beside him, watching every move. The first cut was hesitant. His hand trembled, but the second cut smoother, and the third clean. controlled. Like muscle memory, returning after a long, bitter exile. He didn't know what he was carving at first. Just moved the blade, let it tell him what was hidden inside the wood. The world faded. The noise, the pain, the regrets all slipped into the background. By the time the light shifted to early afternoon, he was staring at a small wooden dog. Rough, unfinished, but unmistakable. Scout sniffed at it and gave an approving grunt. Jack smiled for the first time in days. Later, he polished the tools with the care of someone tending to relics. He wrapped each one back in the cloth and placed them in the box, but left the chisel and carving knife out. They stayed on the counter within reach. He looked around the RV. It was still a mess, mildewed curtains, broken lights, busted floor tiles, but it no longer felt hopeless, because now there was something to work toward, something to rebuild with. The day passed quietly. He and Scout walked the perimeter of the junkyard just before dusk. Frank had left a small radio in the office, and Jack turned it on as they passed, just a voice crackling with static reading the weather. Cold front coming. Chance of snow in the higher elevations. Jack tugged his coat tighter and looked down at Scout. "We'll need to insulate this place," he said. Scout huffed. That night he placed the wooden dog on the shelf above the sink. It stared out into the dark, proud in its own imperfect way. Jack sat at the dinette sketching on the back of an old takeout menu. Shapes, ideas, animals mostly. He'd forgotten how much he liked drawing before the carving. He'd forgotten that part of himself even existed. The RV creaked softly in the wind, but it no longer sounded like decay. It sounded like movement, like something alive. He turned to Scout. "Tomorrow," he said, "we take this into town." Scout thumped his tail against the floor. Jack smiled. Maybe someone out there still cared about hand-carved things. Maybe not. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that something had been found. Something that wasn't rusted metal or regret. Something made by hand. By him. And when he held it, he didn't feel broken. He felt real. As Jack climbed into the makeshift bed, Scout curled beneath the table, and the two of them let the quiet settle around them, not as a weight, but a kind of peace. In the distance, the faint hum of the highway whispered a different life. One Jack might not return to. But tomorrow, he'd step into the town again, this time not with empty hands, but with something to show. A carving, a name, and the beginning of a new story. Jack stood in front of the cafe, the wooden dog in his coat pocket, fingers curled tight around it like a talisman. Maddie's place glowed against the gray morning, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. He wasn't sure why he'd come back so soon. Maybe because it was the only place where someone had spoken to him like he mattered. Maybe because Scout had looked at him this morning with those expectant eyes like he knew Jack had something to show the world. Scout wasn't with him now. He'd left the dog curled up in the RV belly, full eyes half-lidded, but alert. Jack had promised to bring something back, something warm. He stepped inside the cafe. It was quiet this time. Just a few early regulars hunched over coffee cups, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting through the air like it belonged there more than anyone else. Maddie glanced up from the counter and gave him a look that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't indifference either. "You again." "Me again," Jack replied. "You gonna order something or just bless us with your brooding? I've got cash this time. Progress." He took the same seat in the corner. Maddie brought him coffee without asking. A few minutes later, she set down a plate with 2 eggs toast and a slice of ham. No words. Just that firm presence of someone who had seen too much to bother with pretense. Jack ate slowly, savoring the food more than he'd admit. He kept one hand on the carving in his coat pocket, unsure if he'd show it. Unsure if he even should. But when Maddie walked by again, he pulled it out and set it on the table like it might vanish if he hesitated. She stopped in her tracks. "You make that?" Jack nodded, suddenly self-conscious. She picked it up carefully, running her fingers over the rough curves, the grain still visible through the sanding. It was a small bird, this time wings half open, beak tilted slightly upward, as if ready to lift off. "This little bird you carved," she said. "It's got more soul than half the people in this town." Jack blinked. "That's something." "No," she said firmly, sitting down across from him without invitation. "I mean it. There's life in this. It's not just wood. You gave it a story." Jack looked away, unsure how to receive that. Praise wasn't something he'd known how to hold on to in a long time. "Where'd you learn to do this?" Maddie asked. "My dad was a carpenter. He taught me the basics when I was a kid. The rest came after the war. I needed something to do with my hands that didn't involve holding a gun." She nodded slowly, still holding the carving. "You ever sell these used to? Before everything went sideways?" "Well, there's a flea market Saturday. Lot of locals folks from out of town, vendors who sell kitsch and crap. But I think someone'd buy this." She handed it back to him. Jack stared down at the bird. "You really think people still want things like this? I think people want something real. And this," she pointed at the carving, "is real." Jack tucked it back into his pocket. "How much is a table free if you tell them Maddie Reyes sent you?" "I'm on the board." "Technically." Jack hesitated. "I haven't done this in a long time. Then maybe it's time you started again." He finished his coffee and stood. Maddie followed him to the door. "You bring more of those birds or dogs or whatever you make and you show up early Saturday. We'll figure the rest out." Jack stepped outside. The wind had picked up. He pulled his coat tighter and turned back. "Thanks." "For what? For seeing something that doesn't look like much?" Maddie tilted her head. "Don't sell yourself short, Jack. Broken doesn't mean worthless." The walk back to the RV felt lighter somehow, like the gravity of the past had loosened its grip. Jack reached the yard and found Scout waiting at the door, tail thumping slowly. He crouched down. "I think we've got a shot, buddy." Scout gave him a look that could have passed for approval. That night, Jack lit the old lantern and placed his tools on the table like sacred objects. He laid out 3 blocks of wood ones he'd salvaged from an old shelving unit out behind the yard and stared at them until his hands moved on their own. He carved through dinner, through the radio weather report, through the wind outside rattling the siding. By the time he stopped, there were 3 new pieces on the counter. A fox curled in sleep, a barn owl mid-turn, and a small crouching rabbit. Each one flawed, each one alive. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. Jack repaired the RV's leaking vent with a piece of salvaged tarp. Scout kept him company, never straying far. Frank stopped by once with a couple cans of food and grumbled something about not letting yourself starve. Jack didn't say much, but he carved more. And something about that act, the creation, the patience, the motion, kept his mind from slipping into the dark corners. On Friday night, Jack packed the carvings into an old army duffel and laid out his cleanest shirt, a plaid button-up that still held the smell of cedar from years ago. He didn't sleep much, just stared at the ceiling, listening to Scout breathe softly, the warmth of the dog's body grounding him more than any words ever had. Saturday morning came with a sunrise that burned through the fog like it meant business. Jack loaded his pieces into Frank's borrowed wheelbarrow and made the walk into town. The flea market was already humming, vendors shouting, tents flapping in the breeze, kids weaving between tables. He found an empty booth near the edge, laid out a faded blanket, and placed each carving carefully in view. People passed. Some glanced. Some stopped. A few asked prices. He didn't know what to say at first, until one woman offered $20 for the owl. He blinked, nodded. By noon, he'd sold 3 pieces. By 2, a man in a leather jacket asked if he took commissions. And by 3, Jack had something in his pocket that hadn't existed for years, earned money. Real, honest money. Maddie stopped by with 2 coffees and a smug smile. "Told you," she said. Jack looked around at the crowd, at his emptying blanket, at Scout curled beneath the table guarding the last fox. "Feels strange," Jack admitted. "But good strange." Maddie handed him the coffee. "Get used to it." As the market wound down, Jack packed what little was left and watched families pile into their cars. He stood a little straighter. His back still hurt, but the weight had shifted. He looked down at Scout. "We might be onto something." Scout sneezed once and stood. Jack turned back toward the RV, heart steady. He had no illusions. There were still debts to face. Still people he'd hurt. Still a past waiting like a ghost behind glass. But for the first time in a long time, he had a next step. And someone had noticed. Jack stared at the envelope in his hands like it might catch fire. It wasn't thick. Just a few folded pages, one with his name handwritten in block letters, the others stamped with forms, dates, and a heading that made his stomach clench. Veterans Assistance Appeal denied. Again. He sat on the RV steps, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. Scout lay beside him, head resting on Jack's boot ears, flicking at the sound of distant traffic. The wind rustled the tarp he'd fastened over the vent. Everything felt too still, too fragile. Jack rubbed the bridge of his nose. Same damn loop. Doesn't matter what I send them. I'm just another name in a stack. Scout looked up, his eyes calm, as if to say, "So what now?" Jack let the letter fall to the dirt and leaned back against the doorframe. The good feeling from the flea market people actually buying his carvings, someone asking for a commission, felt like it had happened in another life. He wanted to believe he was turning a corner, that maybe things could be different. But every time he took a step forward, the past yanked him back. A memory crept in dusty sunlight streaming through his old workshop window, his son Ethan standing there with a toy airplane in his hands. "Will it fly, Dad?" Jack had smiled. "Not this one. But we can carve one that will glide." He'd kept that promise. For a while. Until the foreclosure. Until the silence. Until the divorce papers came unsigned but final in every other way. Jack shook his head. That part of his life felt sealed behind bulletproof glass, visible but unreachable. "Get up," he muttered to himself. Scout tilted his head. Jack stood and dusted off his jeans. He glanced at the letter on the ground, thought about picking it up, then left it. It didn't matter. What mattered was what he did now. Inside the RV felt warmer, more lived in. Tools were arranged neatly on the counter. His 3 remaining carvings, another fox, a new raven, and a bear, stood on the shelf like silent sentinels. He looked at them the way a father might look at his kids on their first day of school. Pride mixed with fear. He took the raven down and wrapped it in a cloth. Then he grabbed his coat, whistled for Scout, and headed into town. The shop sat 2 blocks from the cafe, tucked between a consignment boutique and an old barber shop that hadn't updated its sign since the 1980s. Its windows were filled with crafts, handmade scarves, paintings, a display of candles shaped like succulents. The sign above read, "The Market Nook." Jack pushed the door open, a bell jingling overhead. The woman behind the counter looked up immediately. Late 30s, round glasses, a bandana holding back a cascade of curls. She smiled like she'd been waiting for him. "You're the guy from the flea market," she said. "Jack Wright." He nodded. "Yeah. You stopped by my booth." "I did. I bought the owl. My kid named it Herbert." Jack chuckled despite himself. "Herbert. That's solid." "I'm Sierra," she said, stepping around the counter. "You carve all that by hand?" "Yes. Started again recently." "Well, I've got a little shelf near the front that's usually reserved for local artists. Would you be interested in putting a few pieces there? Consignment split is 70-30. You keep 70. Jack blinked. "Seriously?" She shrugged. "People loved your work. And it's different from the mass-produced stuff we get. It's real." He pulled out the raven carving still wrapped. "Would this work?" She unwrapped it and stared at it, turning it slowly in her hands. "This is beautiful," she said. "Dark, mysterious. And the detail in the feathers, it's incredible." Jack looked down. "Thanks." "You're not just carving wood, Jack," she said softly. "You're carving your way back into the world." The words hit harder than she probably meant them to. Jack felt something shift. The fog in his chest cleared a little more. Sierra set the carving on the counter. "Let's put this out front. And bring me more when you can. I'll print some tags tonight." He nodded. "I'll bring more this week." "Deal." As he left, a small group entered the store, and Jack caught one of them glancing at the raven as he passed. His heart beat a little faster. Back outside, Scout trotted beside him, tail wagging, tongue lolling. Jack looked down at him. "You hear that? We've got a shelf now. In a real shop." Scout sneezed in approval. That evening, he returned to Maddie's place with a better stride. The cafe was fuller than usual, local kids on their phones, an older couple splitting a slice of pie, 2 mechanics in grease-stained overalls arguing about a busted alternator. Maddie waved him over. "Big day," he sat at the counter. "Got a piece in a shop. Consignment." "Well, damn," she said, pouring him coffee. "Look at you, climbing out of the hole." He smirked, "One splinter at a time." She leaned against the counter. "You ever think maybe you're meant to make stuff that lasts?" Jack stirred his coffee. "Used to think that. Then I stopped. But now, maybe." He looked around the cafe. It felt different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. Even the light seemed warmer. Maddie refilled his mug. "Hey, there's a small art fair coming up in 2 weeks. Town Green. Bigger crowd than the flea market." "You in?" Jack hesitated. "I don't have much inventory." "Then make more. You've got 2 weeks. He thought about the pile of salvageable wood behind the junkyard, about the sketchbook he'd started filling again, about the way Scout watched him carve calm and steady like he understood the purpose of it. "Yeah," Jack said. "I'm in." That night, under the dull glow of the lantern, Jack sat at the dinette Scout curled under the table. He pulled out a block of cedar and began sketching on its surface with a carpenter's pencil. Not just shapes now. Not just animals. Scenes. A man holding out his hand to a dog. A boy flying a carved airplane. a broken window with sunlight streaming through it. Each line held something he couldn't quite say with words. But it was there, in the grain, in the grooves, in the rhythm of blade against wood. And as he worked, he thought about the next piece. One he'd call Scout, because if the carvings were his way back into the world, then Scout had been the first one to lead him there. The art fair buzzed with weekend energy. Folding tables lined the town green, dotted with colorful cloths, handmade crafts, and the hum of small talk beneath wide oak trees. Jack arrived early, pushing a borrowed cart full of new carvings. Scout trotted beside him, leash clipped to a carabiner Jack had hooked on his belt. Jack's booth wasn't fancy, just a folding table. Maddie helped him borrow a sign scribbled on repurposed plywood, hand-carved by Jack Whitmore. He arranged each piece carefully, the raven a curled fox, 2 small deer, and the centerpiece a wooden bust of Scout ears, perked eyes alert. It had taken him 5 days to finish, and he still wasn't sure why he carved it. But people stopped to stare. "That dog's yours?" a man asked, pointing at the bust, then at Scout. "Yeah," Jack said. "Looks just like him. That's the point." People came and went. Some bought small animals. One woman cried when she saw the rabbit carved into the shape of her childhood pet. Jack found he liked the conversations more than he expected. He wasn't selling just carvings. He was selling stories, pieces of himself. And for once, that didn't scare him. By noon, he'd sold 4 pieces and had a list of 5 names for commissions. That's when he saw him. Leather jacket, aviators, gray stubble lining a sharp jaw, hands tucked into his back pockets like he owned the sidewalk. Jack didn't recognize him at first. He hadn't seen that face in over a decade. But the man didn't look at the table or the carvings. He looked straight at Jack. The air dropped 10 degrees. Jack stood still as the man walked over. "You're John Whitmore?" he asked. The voice was deeper now, aged, but the tone still had that tightness, like he measured every word with a scale. "I go by Jack now," Jack said. The man gave a tight smile. "Didn't think I'd find you here. I saw your work at that shop, Market Nook. The Raven. I knew it was yours." Jack's throat was dry. "What do you want?" "To talk, that's all. Talk to my lawyer. You don't have one." Jack clenched his jaw. "You still work for Morrow Construction VP now," the man said. "Not that it matters." Jack looked at Scout, who stood now body tense. The man followed his gaze. "That the same mutt from the news?" "He's not a mutt," Jack said. "He's family." The man smiled. "You always did pick strays." Jack's hand curled at his side. "You didn't answer me." "Why are you here? I heard you were carving again," the man said. And I remembered something. He pulled out his phone and showed Jack a photo, a workshop clean and well lit. On the wall, hanging like art, 3 of Jack's old pieces: a bear, a soaring hawk, and a twisted tree stump shaped into a man's back. "Where'd you get those?" Jack asked, voice low. "Bought 'em, at auction, when your shop was seized." Jack blinked. That shop wasn't for sale. Well, the man said debt collectors have a way of ignoring sentiment. Jack stared at the image. His chest felt hollow. "You're selling my past like you earned it." "I'm preserving it," the man said. "Hell, I'll make you a deal. You want those pieces back, I'll trade you." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Trade what exclusive rights?" "To everything you carve for the next year. I market it. You produce. 50-50 split." Jack nearly laughed. "So you want to own me now too, Jack," the man said, leaning closer. "You have talent, but you don't have reach, or contacts, or capital. I do." "You've got nerve," Jack muttered. "Coming here, showing me what you stole and calling it preservation." The man straightened. Be careful who wants to buy your past. They might already own part of it. Jack looked him dead in the eye. Then I'll carve something new, something you don't own. The man sighed, pocketed his phone, and walked away without another word. Jack stood there for a moment, fists clenched, adrenaline surging. Hey. He turned to see Maddie holding 2 lemonades. That guy looked like bad news. He is, Jack said. She handed him a cup. You okay? No. You will be. Jack exhaled hard. Scout leaned into his leg, grounding him. The rest of the afternoon passed slower. Jack made a few more sales, but his mind was elsewhere on the hawk, the tree stump, the way his past had been stripped, boxed, and sold. That night back at the RV, he sat across from Scout with a new piece of wood in front of him. He didn't draw first, didn't plan. He just carved. His hands moved with purpose, not rage. Every stroke was a defiance. Every groove a refusal. By midnight, a shape emerged, a man standing in wind arms, outstretched back, bent but not broken. Behind him, wings. Not eagle wings, not angel wings. Wings made of shattered wood. Jack stared at it, breathing hard. This one's ours, he whispered to Scout. He can't have it. Scout barked once, low and firm. Jack nodded. We keep going. He placed the piece beside Scout's bust on the shelf. Tomorrow he'd return to the market nook. He'd bring Sierra new pieces. He'd show up early. Make good on the commissions. Let the man in the leather jacket rot behind his glass cases of stolen pride. Jack Whitmore was building again, not from memory, but from truth. The next morning, Jack stood in front of the market nook, with a duffel bag full of fresh carvings slung over his shoulder and a knot in his stomach. Scout sat patiently by his side, tail flicking softly against the pavement. The glass door hadn't even been unlocked yet, but the sign hanging behind it said, "Open at 10 a.m., and his watch read 9:43. He didn't mind waiting. After the encounter with the man in the leather jacket, the same man who'd once been his business partner, who walked away when Jack needed help most, he welcomed the stillness. Scout looked up at him and nudged his knee with his nose. "I know, boy," Jack said softly, running a hand along the dog's ears. "I'm not going back there, but I need to see this through." By the time Sierra arrived, keys jangling and coffee in hand, Jack had replayed that market conversation 100 times. Each version ended the same, with Jack walking away from another piece of himself someone else thought they owned. "Morning," Sierra said, unlocking the door. Jack gave a small nod. "Got some new pieces?" "I've got space," she smiled. "And after that, fair people have been asking." Inside the market nook was warm and filled with the scent of beeswax and cedar. Jack unpacked 3 new pieces, the winged man, a curled-up cat, and a striking mask carved from dark walnut, with 2 hollow eyes and a scar splitting one cheek. Sierra studied them silently, especially the winged man. "This one's got something heavy in it," she said. Jack nodded. "It's not about flight. It's about standing after the fall." Sierra glanced at him. "You all right?" "No," he said. "But I'm better than I was." He handed her a small folded note with pricing and short descriptions. She began placing the pieces onto their small display shelf, arranging them with care. "You know," she said, "when people buy these, they don't ask about your past. They ask about what's in the wood." Jack looked at the mask. "The past is in the wood. But that doesn't mean I have to explain it." He left the shop lighter somehow, like every carving he put into the world let go of a brick he'd been carrying on his back. Back at the RV, Jack set up his tools again and began carving the dog bust he'd promised for a couple who'd lost their golden retriever the year before. Scout lay at his feet, watching every motion with his usual quiet attentiveness. That evening, while sanding the fine details of the snout, Jack's phone buzzed. It was an old number, one he hadn't seen in years. He froze. The name Ethan Whitmore, his son. His finger hovered over the screen. Answer it. But he didn't. He let it ring out. Scout lifted his head, sensing the tension. Jack dropped the phone onto the table like it had burned him. Later that night, as Scout slept, Jack sat alone holding the phone. The missed call glared back at him. He hadn't spoken to Ethan since the foreclosure, since the shouting match in the hospital hallway, since Jack walked out ashamed of the man he'd become. His son was 12 then. He'd be nearly 20 now. What would he even say? Sorry I failed you. Sorry I disappeared. He turned the phone over in his hands, then back again. The next day, Maddie stopped by with a bag of biscuits and a flyer. Found this on the postboard outside the bank, she said, dropping it on the table. Jack opened it. Veteran Voices, an exhibit honoring local veterans through storytelling and art. Seeking submissions, photos, carvings, letters, objects that hold meaning. Hosted by the Charleston VFW Hall. November 11th, Jack blinked. That's 3 weeks from now. Thought it might be something worth considering, Maddie said. Jack stared at the flyer. His first instinct was to say no. He didn't tell stories. He carved them. That was the point, less explaining, more creating. But something in the idea stuck with him. Objects that hold meaning. He looked at the winged man still sitting on the counter, at the raven, at the mask. Maybe there was space in this town for more than just selling his work. Maybe there was room to say something with it. He folded the flyer and slipped it into the notebook he kept beneath the tools. The next few days blurred into a rhythm, early mornings, long hours in the RV, short walks with Scout through the edge of the woods that bordered the junkyard. He found old cedar in a busted shed, sanded it clean, started new projects. But the phone call haunted him. By the following weekend, it happened again. Ethan Whitmore. This time, a voicemail. Jack listened with a pounding heart. Dad, it's me. I heard you're back in Charleston, Sierra told me. I didn't know if I should call, but I'm heading out west soon. I wanted to say hi. That's all. Hope you're all right. He replayed the message 3 times, then deleted it. Scout sat up on the bench seat beside him, watching carefully. I know, Jack whispered. I know I should call. He trailed off, then stood up. He pulled down the carving he'd been too afraid to touch for weeks. A figure of a boy holding a toy airplane. Something he'd started the day after the workshop closed and never finished. The shape had haunted him. Now he placed it on the table, ran his fingers over the rough edges. Some pieces of the past aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to remind you why you don't live there anymore. But maybe, just maybe, they could still guide you forward. He worked into the night, carving not to remember, but to reclaim. By dawn, the boy was finished. Not flawless, but whole. Jack placed it beside the others he planned to submit to the VFW exhibit. Then he opened his phone, created a new contact. Ethan, my son. No number, no email, just a name. For now. But it was something. And when he looked at Scout, curled beneath the table at the morning light, breaking through the RV's busted blinds, he knew something had shifted. Tomorrow he'd deliver the boy with the airplane. And maybe the day after that, he'd find the courage to call him back. The VFW hall smelled like coffee and old varnish. Jack stood just inside the entrance, his breath visible in the cool air that hadn't yet warmed from the space heaters buzzing in the corners. The place had that small-town weight pictures of young men in frames lining the wall, flags folded into perfect triangles, medals under glass stories that hadn't been told in years. Scout stood close at his side, tail low, eyes alert. Jack's arms ached slightly from carrying the crate, but his real weight was elsewhere, deep in his chest, coiled tight like wire. He hadn't done something like this since before everything broke. He took a breath, then stepped forward. A woman with short silver hair and a clipboard intercepted him halfway. Her name tag read, Marla. "You're Jack Whitmore, right?" she asked, eyes scanning a list. "Yeah," Jack replied, shifting the crate in his arms. Marla smiled and pointed. "Table 5, right past the Navy display. We're real glad to have your work here." Jack nodded a silent thanks, then made his way to the far end of the hall. The place was still setting up, volunteers hanging photos, pinning handwritten letters on poster boards, adjusting easels and displays. Laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen, and someone was tuning a guitar on the makeshift stage near the front. At table 5, Jack set down the crate and began unpacking. The winged man first, his arms spread wings, broken but bold. Then the boy with the airplane. Then the raven. And finally, the new piece, a pair of unlaced combat boots with a set of dog tags draped across them, like a soft exhale. No flash, no clutter, just wood. And truth. He placed a small sign in front. "Each piece tells what I couldn't say out loud." J.W. Scout lay down beneath the table, head resting between his paws. Calm. Watchful. Visitors trickled in slowly, then steadily. By midday, the hall buzzed with quiet energy, families, vets, teenagers on a school project, reporters with small cameras asking questions about legacy and service. Jack stood near his table, hands in his coat pockets, nodding, as people stopped and stared. Some spoke, some didn't. Some touched the carvings gently with reverence. Others took photos. But everyone lingered longer than he expected. A teenage boy with a buzz cut approached his younger sister at his side. He pointed at the boy with the airplane. "That one feels like my little brother. He used to wait by the window every time I came home from basic." Jack offered a small smile. "I carved it for someone I hoped was still waiting too." The boy didn't say anything, but his eyes did. He nodded once before walking away. Then came a woman in her late 30s with auburn hair pulled into a tight braid. Her eyes locked on the boots. "My husband's are still in the closet," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I never untied the laces." Jack said nothing. He just nodded. That seemed to be enough. Throughout the day, Jack found himself watching the faces, not just the reactions. And with each person, each pause, each tear or silent smile, something softened inside him. Not relief, not pride, just stillness, peace that didn't ask permission. Sierra arrived around 2 with her son in tow. The boy ran up to Scout, throwing his arms around the dog's neck like they were old friends. Sierra smiled. "You holding up okay?" Jack gave a nod. "More than I thought I would." She looked over the table. "The boots one. That hits hard." "Made it last week," Jack said. "Didn't sleep much after." Sierra stepped back, gave him a once-over. "You look different, Jack. How like you stopped dragging the past behind you and started walking forward." Jack didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. But Sierra was right. Something had shifted. Something was still shifting. Later, a woman approached the table slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the tablecloth. She wore a dark green coat and black gloves. Her hair was graying at the temples, but her eyes were unmistakable. Jack's breath caught in his throat. "Hi, Jack," she said. It was Evelyn, Ethan's mother, his ex-wife. He hadn't seen her in years. "I saw the listing in the paper," she said. "Sierra told Ethan about it. He's in Oregon now." "Couldn't come." Jack nodded, heart pounding. I wasn't expecting you. I wasn't sure I'd come." They both looked down at the carving of the boy with the airplane. "That was his," she said softly. Jack nodded. "I never finished it. Not until last week." Evelyn's eyes welled. She reached out, then pulled her hand back. "He called you, you know." "I know." I didn't answer. Why, Jack looked at her. "Because I don't know how to be someone worth answering for." She held his gaze. "You don't have to be perfect, Jack. Just show up." They stood in silence. People milled around them, but the world felt narrowed to a few feet of space and a lifetime of words unsaid. Finally, Evelyn touched the carving gently. "He'd like this. He still has that plane." "I know," Jack said. "I kept the sketch all these years." She turned to him. "You should call him." "I want to, I just—" He hesitated. "I don't want to make things worse." "You won't." Jack looked down at Scout, then back at her. "Tell him I'll call tomorrow," he said. Evelyn nodded. "I will." She stepped back, gave him a small smile, and disappeared into the crowd. By the time the exhibit started winding down, Jack stood with his hands behind his back, Scout beside him, a hollowed-out feeling in his chest that wasn't grief this time. It was something gentler, something like hope. As he packed up the last carving, a man approached and offered to buy the winged man. Jack paused, looked at the piece, then shook his head. "Not for sale," he said. "Why not?" the man asked. Jack smiled quietly. "Because that one's about not giving up." The man nodded, understanding more than Jack had expected. Outside, the sun had dipped low. Jack turned to Scout. "We did all right, didn't we?" Scout wagged his tail. Jack looked back at the hall once more, then forward down the road. Tomorrow he'd make the call. But tonight he had peace. Jack hadn't planned to drive back to the house. Not ever. But 3 days after the exhibit, after he'd made the call to Ethan and heard his voice tremble on the other end of the line, something inside him said, "Go back." Not to stay, just to face it. One last time. The house sat at the end of a gravel road just outside of Beckley, overgrown with vines, windows dusted with grime, and the porch sagging like a tired shoulder. A bank had taken it years ago after the foreclosure, then sold it to a property management company that never did anything with it. It stood vacant, like a ghost too stubborn to move on. Jack parked at the edge of the old driveway, Scout in the passenger seat of Maddie's borrowed truck. The dog shifted uncomfortably, sensing Jack's tension. He took a long breath. "You don't have to come in." "But I do." Scout didn't move, just gave a soft whine, then hopped out of the truck behind him. The key no longer worked, so Jack nudged the door open with his shoulder. It gave way with a low creak. The air inside was stale, dry, and thick with dust. The living room still held the outline of where furniture used to be. Sunlight poured in through the broken blinds, casting pale stripes across the hardwood floor. A cracked picture frame lay face down near the fireplace. Jack picked it up. A family photo, him, Evelyn, and Ethan, taken the year before everything unraveled. His hair was darker then, his shoulders squared. He didn't recognize the man anymore. He placed it gently on the mantel, brushing dust from the glass. Scout padded beside him, nose twitching, then froze. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked, kneeling. Scout sniffed around the base of a built-in shelf, tail low. Then he scratched once at the wood. Jack followed the scent, memory, and instinct. He felt along the edge of the shelf, pushed slightly, and a panel clicked open. Behind it was a small, dust-covered box. His box. He'd hidden it after the bank letters started arriving. Not because it held anything valuable in dollars, but because it was his real wealth notes, sketches, hand-drawn plans for carvings that never got made. Letters to Ethan he never mailed, even a small, folded flag his grandfather had given him before deployment. His fingers shook as he opened the lid. On top was a wooden ring, a simple circle carved from walnut. He'd made it for Ethan's 10th birthday, but never gave it to him. Inside the band, he had carved 2 initials, EW. Jack sat back on his heels, blinking fast. "The past doesn't rot in the ground," he whispered. "It waits buried until someone's brave enough to dig it up." Scout nuzzled his arm. Jack sat on the bare floor for what felt like an hour, going through the box slowly, carefully. Some pages were yellowed, others torn. One sketch, a carving of a boy and his dog standing at the edge of a cliff, hit him like a punch to the chest. He folded it carefully and slid it into his pocket. Back outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves scattered across the driveway. Jack stood on the porch looking out at the property one last time. He didn't need to come back again. The ghosts weren't in the house anymore. They were with him, but lighter now, known, faced. On the drive home, the sun broke through the clouds, casting soft light over the hills. Scout sat upright in the passenger seat, tongue out, window cracked just enough for the wind to touch his face. Back at the RV, Jack lit the small propane heater, set Scout's bowl down, and placed the box on the table. He unpacked it piece by piece. The flag he pinned up beside the window. The letters he tucked into a leather binder. And the ring he set beside his carving tools, the walnut glinting in the orange light. Then he picked up a fresh block of wood and began to carve. Not a bird, not a fox, not even Scout. A boy and his father, sitting on a log, talking. He wasn't sure what their faces would look like yet, but he'd find them. The next morning, he met with Sierra at the market nook to drop off new pieces. She noticed the ring on his pinky finger immediately. "New?" she asked. Old Jack replied, "but ready to be seen." Sierra handed him a coffee. "Your table at the exhibit got the most comments. Some folks asked if you'd ever teach carving." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Teach," she shrugged. "Kids. Veterans. Doesn't have to be formal. Just people who need something real to hold on to." He hadn't thought of that. He glanced at Scout, then back at Sierra. Maybe. Afterward, Jack visited Maddie's cafe. She was wiping down the counter when he walked in. "You look like someone who just exorcised a house," she said, eyeing him up and down. He smirked. "Funny you say that." "Go back, yeah. Found a box I thought was lost. Memories, mostly. Any good ones?" "Some," Jack said. "Enough." She poured his coffee. "You ready for what's next?" He nodded. "For the first time in a long while, I think I am." She leaned on the counter. "Good. Because I signed you up to do a short talk at the library next month." Jack froze. "You what veteran artist series? 5 minutes tops. Just talk about why you carve." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. "All right," he said finally. 5 minutes. You'll do great." That night he added the finishing touches to the new carving. The boy and the man on the log. No words between them, just hands resting near each other, not quite touching. He stared at it a long time. Then he picked up his phone. Dialed. It rang twice, then, hey, Ethan's voice on the other end, cautious, young, familiar. Hey, Jack said, voice tight. I went back. To the house, silence. You did, yeah. Found something. A ring I made you. Never gave it to you. Ethan breathed in. Still have it, I do. More silence. Jack added, I carved something I want to send you, if you want it. I do. Jack swallowed hard. Thanks for answering. Ethan paused. Then, thanks for calling. They talked another 5 minutes. Small things, nothing heavy, but the thread was there, and that was enough. When Jack hung up, he sat beside Scout on the floor, petting the dog's thick fur. You were right, buddy, he said softly. Some things need to be dug up. Scout wagged his tail. Jack reached for another piece of wood. He had a lot more to carve. The sky darkened faster than usual that Friday. A bruised swell of clouds rolled in from the west, painting the horizon in thick gray strokes. Jack stood outside the RV with Scout, watching as the first gusts bent the tops of the trees and sent a scatter of leaves racing across the junkyard gravel. He could smell the rain before it arrived, sharp, metallic electric. Storms didn't scare him. Not anymore. But they reminded him, and reminders carried weight. He double-checked the RV's old seals, moved the tools off the fold-out table inside, and secured the wood scraps he kept in crates beneath the window ledge. Scout, already pacing, settled once Jack closed the door and latched the bolt. The wind howled just beyond the thin aluminum walls. Inside, Jack turned on the radio. Static. Then a weather bulletin. Severe thunderstorm warning in effect for Charleston County. High winds, risk of hail. He turned it off. He wasn't afraid of storms. He just didn't like how they always brought back the same night. Kandahar, 2006. The outpost blackout. The explosion. The silence afterward. The dog that didn't survive it. Scout must have sensed it too, how the air shifted inside Jack as much as outside. The dog curled beside him, resting his head against Jack's boot. You're still here, Jack said softly. That's all I need. He tried to carve, but his hands felt stiff, like the old storm had crept into his bones, along with the new one outside. Instead, he stared out the small window, watching the wind rip at the dying trees. Then a knock. 3 sharp raps at the door. Jack tensed. No one came out here. Not unless they needed something or meant something. He opened the door with caution, Scout close behind him. There, standing soaked in the rain, was Cole Maddox, the man with the leather jacket, the man who tried to buy his work, his name, his past. What the hell are you doing here? Jack asked. Cole pushed wet hair from his face. We need to talk, I told you. You need to hear this. Jack didn't move. Say it from there. Cole exhaled hard. That carving the boy with the airplane. It's getting attention. Someone saw a photo online, tracked it to you. A collector. He contacted me thinking I still represented your work. I told him no, but he made me an offer. Big one. 6 figures. I'm not selling it. I know, I told him that. But Jack, this guy, he's got reach. Media reach. He wants to do a story on you, your service, your carvings. He thinks you're the story America needs right now. I'm not a story, Jack growled. I'm a man trying to survive. Cole looked genuinely tired. Then maybe it's time people knew what survival looked like. Jack stared at him, the rain curling over the edge of the RV roof. What's your angle? No angle. Not this time. I'm not here to buy you. I'm here to say I was wrong. I left when you needed help. I buried your work like it didn't matter. And now the world's catching up to what I already knew. Jack stepped outside, closing the door behind him. He didn't want Scout in the middle of this. You're not here for redemption, Jack said. You're here because you're scared someone else will tell the story without you. Cole didn't deny it. I don't need the world to know me, Jack continued. I need my son to know I'm trying. I need the people who saw those carvings and felt something to carry that with them. Quietly. Not in headlines. Cole nodded once. Okay. I'll walk away. You already did, Jack said. Years ago. Cole turned and walked back toward the road, the storm swallowing his figure. Back inside, Jack leaned against the door, breathing hard. Scout nuzzled him. I didn't break, Jack whispered. Not this time. The storm hit full force that night, sheets of rain, thunder that shook the cabinets, wind that pressed against the RV like it wanted inside. But Jack stayed steady, hands wrapped around a hot mug, eyes watching the flame of the small heater flicker. He didn't sleep. Not because of the noise, because something in him had finally clicked. Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to show you what's still standing. And he was. In the morning, everything was soaked. Branches littered the ground. A trash can had blown across the lot. But the RV held. The tools stayed dry. Scout, unbothered, leapt through puddles like a puppy. Jack stepped out, boots squelching in the mud, and saw Maddie's car parked just outside the gate. She waved him over. You all right? She asked. Storm couldn't touch me. I heard you had a visitor. Jack smirked. Cole Maddox. Brought another offer. I declined. She looked impressed. Must have felt good. It did. They sat on the hood of her car, drinking bad gas station coffee in silence. Then Maddie pulled out a folded sheet of paper. What's this library talk schedule? You're on for Tuesday. Jack groaned. Relax, it's just 15 people. Maybe 20, half of them already know your work. I'm not good at speaking. You don't have to be. Just tell them why you carve. Jack looked toward the junkyard, toward the RV, toward the distant line of trees. Because it's the only way I've ever been honest, he said quietly. Words get tangled. But wood doesn't lie. Maddie smiled. Then say that. That night, Jack sat at his makeshift table, Scout dozing nearby, and began carving something new. Not a boy, not a soldier. A man. Older. Weathered. Holding out a hand to someone smaller, not yet carved into shape. It would take time, but he wasn't in a hurry. He'd survived the storm. And he was still standing. Jack stood in front of the circle of folding chairs, his fingers twitching at his sides, the unfinished carving resting on the table beside him like a piece of himself he hadn't figured out how to name yet. Scout lay at his feet, calm as ever, the only living thing in the room more grounded than the floor. The words hung in the air. No one moved. No one interrupted. So he kept going. I carved before the war. I carved during it whenever I could. Scraps of wood, sometimes bone. It was quiet. Simple. It made sense when the world didn't. Then I came home and didn't carve for almost a decade. He looked around at the faces, some young, some lined by time, all waiting without judgment. I didn't stop because I didn't want to, he continued. I stopped because I thought I didn't deserve it anymore. Thought I had to be a man who carried silence, who earned his pain. A chair squeaked softly as someone shifted. The room still smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. Jack took a step closer to the table. I lost my home, my workshop, my marriage. I lost my son for a while. Not because of drugs or some dramatic fall, but because I just disappeared. Slowly, quietly. Every year, a little more gone. That's what silence does. It doesn't break you all at once, it wears you down like water on stone. He looked down at Scout. The dog looked back up at him with eyes full of loyalty and memory. Then one day, I found this guy, Jack said. A stray. Sick. Scared. He didn't bark, didn't even whine. He just lay there waiting for the world to end. I saw him and thought, that's me. Some people smiled at that. Others lowered their eyes, quietly moved. I fixed him up the best I could. In return, he stayed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't care about my past. Just wanted to sit beside me. Jack pointed to the unfinished carving. This piece right here. This one's about him. About me. About anyone who's ever sat in the dark, waiting for someone to reach in. He paused. People ask me why I carve. It's because words were too hard, too dangerous. They came out wrong or not at all. But my hands, they remembered things my mouth wouldn't say. Pain, joy, regret, hope. He looked at the boy with the airplane. I made this one for my son. Started it years ago. Finished it last month. He hasn't seen it yet, but he will. Then to the winged man. This one. That's about falling. And choosing to stand up anyway, even if the wings don't work anymore. The room stayed still. Someone sniffled quietly. The kind of silence that didn't hurt, just made space. Jack took a breath. You don't have to be a veteran to know what it feels like to lose your voice. Or to carry something heavy that no one sees. Trauma doesn't check IDs. But healing. Healing comes when you start speaking again, even if it's just through your hands. He let the words sit. Then finally, with a half smile, he added, and sometimes healing shows up with muddy paws and too much fur. The room broke into soft laughter. Maddie beamed from the back. Sierra dabbed at her eye with a tissue. Even Marla gave a quiet nod, proud and steady. Someone raised their hand. What happened to your son? The voice asked gently. Jack nodded slowly. I called him. After the exhibit. After going back to the house I lost. He answered. We didn't say much, but it was enough. We're talking again. That's the only way forward, talking even when it hurts. Another hand. A younger man in a VA jacket. Do you teach? Jack looked at him surprised. Not really, not yet. Why? Because carving feels like something that might keep me sane. Jack felt something catch in his chest. I'd be honored, he said. Another pause. Then someone near the front said softly, thank you. Jack looked around the room, this small, warm space that had felt so daunting an hour ago, and realized he wasn't scared anymore. He was seen. And he was still standing. As the talk wrapped up, people came up one by one, shaking his hand, asking about the carvings, telling their own small pieces of story. Jack listened to every word. He packed the pieces gently, carefully, as if they were pieces of a life being reassembled. Scout trotted behind him as they stepped into the cool night air. Outside, the stars were out. You did good in there, Jack said to the dog. Scout wagged his tail, then leapt into the truck's passenger seat, like he already knew the next chapter was coming. As Jack started the engine, his phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Proud of you. Let me know when I can come visit." Jack smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "It's time." He drove off into the night headlights, cutting through the dark, carving a path forward, just wide enough for one man and a dog brave enough to walk it. The road back to Charleston felt different this time. The kind of different Jack couldn't explain with words, only with the silence that felt lighter, now no longer thick with guilt or regret, but open like something had finally exhaled. Scout sat in the passenger seat, head out the window, his ears flapping as they passed golden fields and sleepy towns. The radio played low old Johnny Cash, the kind of voice that held pain and hope in equal measure. Jack tapped the steering wheel, letting the hum of tires and tune soothe whatever pieces inside him were still finding their place. He was heading home, not to the RV or the junkyard. Home meant something else now. It meant people, conversations, a second chance. Ethan was coming in that evening, flying into the small regional airport just outside town. Jack had asked if he wanted to meet somewhere public, somewhere neutral, but Ethan had just said, "I want to see where you live." So Jack had cleaned, swept the RV, wiped the dust from the windows, laid out an extra blanket, even bought real coffee, not the instant stuff. Maddie had dropped off a couple sandwiches, pretending it wasn't a big deal. But he knew she cared. They all did now. He parked near the terminal entrance just as the sun dipped low, casting long orange shadows across the tarmac. Scout stood beside him, tail wagging, nose twitching, as people spilled out of the glass doors. Then he saw him. Ethan. Taller now. Leaner. The same sharp jawline Jack saw in the mirror every morning. He carried a single bag and wore a plain hoodie, but there was something in the way he walked. Shoulders, loose eyes, scanning, looking for something familiar that made Jack's heart ache. "Dad?" Ethan asked as he approached, voice unsure. Jack took a step forward. "Hey, kid." They stood there a few feet apart until Scout broke the distance, bounding over and pressing against Ethan's legs like he'd been waiting his whole life for this reunion. Ethan laughed, surprised. "This him, Scout?" "Yeah," Jack said, voice catching. "He found me when I didn't want to be found." Ethan scratched behind the dog's ears, eyes misting. Smart dog. They drove back in near silence, but it wasn't the hard kind. Just the kind where words weren't needed yet. Jack watched his son in the corner of his eye, noting the way his hands rested easily in his lap. No tension, no anger. At the RV, Jack held the door open and let Ethan step in first. "This is it," Jack said. "Cramped, old, but mine." Ethan looked around slowly, noted the carvings lined up along the walls, some half-finished, the flag over the window, the ring resting on a shelf. "You kept it," he said, pointing. "Yeah," Jack replied. "Meant to give it to you years ago, never did." Ethan walked over, picked it up, turned it between his fingers. "Can I?" Jack nodded. Ethan slid it on. It fit. Not perfect, but enough. They sat down across from each other at the small table, 2 mugs of coffee between them. "I missed a lot," Jack said finally, "and I can't make up for that in a weekend. Or a year. I just want you to know that I'm here now. All in." Ethan stared at him for a long time. "Then I don't need perfect. I just need real." Jack nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. They talked. About little things, first schoolwork where Ethan lived now, then bigger things, the years apart, the reasons, the hurt, and slowly, like a splinter working its way out, something soft and painful and necessary passed between them. Later that night, they took a walk. Scout led the way through the edge of the woods behind the junkyard, where the trees leaned in like old friends and the moonlight caught on the leaves. Jack pointed out spots where he'd carved. See that trunk? That's where I tested the first raven. Didn't work. Ethan laughed. Looks more like a frog. They walked in silence again until Ethan asked, "Why'd you really start carving again?" Jack thought about it, because it was the only way to tell the truth without breaking apart. They reached a small clearing where Jack had planted a bench from old reclaimed wood. They sat. "You know," Jack said quietly, "I used to think surviving was enough, that if I just stayed alive, I was doing okay. But I've learned something else." Ethan looked over, waiting. "It's not about just surviving. It's about showing up for yourself, for the people you love, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy." Ethan didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, like he understood more than he could put into words. Back at the RV, Jack pulled out a new block of wood, placed it on the table. "I want to carve us," he said. "Not a perfect version. Just us. Here. Now." Ethan smiled. "You think I'm worth carving?" Jack looked him in the eye. "I've been carving toward this moment my whole life." The next morning they worked side by side, Ethan sanding, Jack carving. The radio played in the background, and Scout snored softly in the sunlit corner. And for the first time in years, Jack felt whole. Not fixed, but real. Present. Home. Because in the end, the story hadn't been about war or pain or even carving. It had been about learning to speak again. About finding courage in connection. About trusting that even broken things could hold beauty. That silence didn't have to be the ending. And that sometimes the smallest chisel in the right hands could carve out redemption. One cut at a time.